at least for the students that I've encountered, of course it varies, between individuals, but I've found that the feedback sometimes has to be a little softer and it can't always come at the wrong time.
So, welcome to T Podcast, Teaching English at Ibapa. And we have here Miss Knikki Hernandez, right? That's the
Yes, you
okay.
got it.
So, let's talk about first your teaching journey or your career. So, can you share your journey into your academic tutoring? What inspired you to become a tutor?
Yes, thank you so much. It was actually Pinterest back in the day when I was in high school at like 16 years old. I was looking for a job and teaching was always something I was into, I was interested in. And I scrolled on Pinterest, saw an opportunity to tutor online with a Chinese-based company, and I applied for it. At the time, the requirements to be a tutor were not as stringent and strict as they are now, which is why they hired me at 16 years old. And I had like zero qualifications. I just knew how to work a computer and write well and fill out an application, basically. And they hired me. And ever since then, I've really just been tutoring online. Of course, I do have my full time teaching job. I am a full time classroom teacher, but my heart has really always been with working with students one on one and tutoring in an online format.
That's very nice. So, can you tell me, like, what does a typical day look like for you as a writing tutor?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spend about 90% of my day at school because I'm a full-time teacher. However, in the evenings, I spend anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. It's a lot of work, but I spend usually anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, depending on the day, working with students on their academic writing, on their school assignments. And sometimes kids just take creative writing courses with me because they want to write from that place. They don't want to write from a place of academia. They want to write from a more creative center that they have in their souls. And that's a very different thing because creative writing is is you creating something from nothing essentially, whereas academic writing is you building on something that has already been established or created. So those two styles of writing are very different, and depending on the student, of course, and what they have to do, I will spend some time in the evenings working with them.
Lovely. So, can you tell me more for our listener who are not familiar with the difference between academic and creative? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, creative writing is more, I look at it as more fiction based. So, we're learning how to express ourselves in our most authentic and unique voice. And creative writers and creative writing in general is really unique because as an author, you get to decide. You're the authority. You're the one that is making the determinations on how a character sounds, how you describe something. And so you really get to develop your own voice and your own sense of style when it comes to writing. And also in creative writing, there really are not a ton of, academic type rules. You don't have to fit a certain parameter and have a certain number of sentences and have a thesis statement. Academic writing can be very structured and organized and sometimes very linear, whereas creative writing is usually it's not always that. It can be, but you as the writer really have control over the direction that you go. Whereas in academic writing, it's not that you don't have control over the direction that you go, but it's more analytical and technical and evidence based.
Yeah, one of my, we could say, conundrum is that when I teach academic writing, particularly IELTS writing, it's like most of the students tend to shift to a creative one. And for some reason, they cannot understand, like, hey, we're academic, let's focus on academic. Why are you talking about imaginations? Like, no, it's like that's one of the challenges. So in your case, how do you address those kind of uh situation where the students are having struggle with their writing uh with their writing in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things that I do. One, there is a course. I didn't design it. I'm not an affiliate of the course. I just really like the course because I've gone through it myself and I've used it with students, and it's called Writing is Power. It's an excellent course. I don't know exactly the person who teaches it. I just found it one day. It was on a Facebook ad that popped up on my phone, and I said, I'm buying this. And it was well worth the investment. And I've used it, and it really helps kids understand the foundations of writing in general. So creative writing and academic writing, they still have the same foundation. You still need to have a vocabulary. You still need to understand grammar. You still need to understand the relationship between words. All of those things are going to enhance your ability to write well. And he presents the course with easy videos that are easily consumable, and he provides like certain activities and exercises and things like that in his videos so that you can see what he's talking about, because he does a lot of demonstrations and it's just really helpful. So I had a student a few years ago who I had go through the Writing is Power course with me, and we would watch the videos, we would discuss the topics, I would provide additional samples and examples that he could work on. And his writing got really good. He was a ninth grade student, probably writing at like a fifth grade level at the time. And he was actually within just a few short weeks able to bring his writing skills up to where they needed to be so that he could get good grades in his English, in his high school English class, which was great because we were strengthening that foundation. So a lot of times students, at least the students that I have worked with, they have lacked that foundation. And when they have it strengthened, then their creative writing blossoms, but so does their academic writing because they learn the technical aspect of the language. They're not just stringing random words together. They're actually understanding that language is the foundation of communication. And they start to develop an appreciation for that, and they do really well. The other thing that I do with my students is I will have them write. So let me give you an example. I was tutoring a student one time who was applying for medical programs, high school medical programs and such. And I didn't want to do the work for her, obviously. So I had her write out her answers to the questions that were on the application. And then I would pretend that I was her. And on a separate document, I would write my answer as if I were her. And then after a few minutes, we would convene and she would compare her writing with mine, and I would compare my writing with hers. And then she would start to see and learn how she could make her writing better by observing what I did and also incorporating some of the things that I put into my answers into her own writing. And she was able to blend the two of them. And so over time with practice, she got better at developing her own ideas.
That's great. So, besides seeing your students improving their writing skill overall, like what other things do you find most rewarding about your work?
There are so many things that are rewarding about teaching in general. Teaching is a very hard profession. I actually just wrote a blog about that the other day. Somebody had asked me if they thought that they should become a teacher, and there's a lot of debate on whether people should become teachers. And so I just wrote a very simple, short blog about, the struggles of being a teacher, but also, how you can make it and how you can overcome some of these difficulties. And I think that overcoming those difficulties as a teacher in my own case has been incredibly rewarding. So for me, for example, as a teacher, a classroom teacher, not just a tutor, but as a classroom teacher, one of the accomplishments or goals that I had was to have impeccable classroom management. Now, I'm definitely not perfect, but I knew that a lot of teachers don't succeed because of classroom management. It's because of the behaviors that are happening in their classroom, and they just get so burnt out that they can't teach, they can't, it's just a lot, and it is very difficult. And so I decided that as a teacher, I wanted to be really good at it before I ever stepped foot in a classroom. And for me, achieving that goal was probably one of the most rewarding aspects of teaching that I have personally ever experienced. because it led to me having good relationships with my students, having a good reputation as a teacher, having a good relationship with the parents and the administration, because they know that, my classroom is very calm and peaceful and serene, but yet very structured and productive. So that to me has been by far my biggest accomplishment as a teacher. And I'm very grateful that I chose to focus on that early on in my career.
Lovely. And when it comes to challenges, personally, as a writing teacher myself, one of the challenges that I have is that I tend to become too objective to the point that the student doesn't like. Like, I am trying to write my emotion, but why are you stopping me by giving me the grammar structure, the syntax, or rather the logical flow? What about you? What are some challenges you face as a tutor, and how do you overcome them?
Yes, that's a really interesting question. And I'm glad you brought that up because for me, it really does depend on the student. And if a student really wants me to correct them, I've noticed that because I've worked for a lot of Chinese-based companies before, that in different cultures, feedback is viewed very differently. So with the Chinese individuals that I worked with, it was all about feedback. They wanted feedback on everything. They wanted to know what they did right, what they did wrong. They wanted to know everything. So if I didn't give them feedback, like immediate critical feedback, not rude, of course, but critical in the sense that I'm helping them fix something or make it better, if I didn't do that, they did not like that. They would ding me as a teacher and say that I don't feel that she gave enough feedback. They would actually say that. Whereas the students that I've worked with here in the United States, it's a little different. The feedback, I think, has to be, at least for the students that I've encountered, of course, it varies, between individuals, but I've found that the feedback sometimes has to be a little softer and it can't always come at the wrong time. One of my biggest strength as a teacher is my timing. My sense of timing is just really good. And so I have this kind of innate feeling when I'm working with a student as to when I should give them feedback and when I need to kind of pull back a little bit. And so it's not about, for me, it's not about correcting every little mistake and, that kind of thing. It's more about being in tune with the student, how they feel, how they think, when are they going to be receptive to the feedback, when are they not going to be so receptive. And also, another key component that I incorporate in my tutoring lessons is brevity, brevity and feedback. Parents usually like lengthier feedback. They want to know the more specifics and the details and things like that. But the students, they want brief feedback. And so I keep it that way. When I talk to them, I say, you need to correct this. Do you understand why? And if they say no, then I'll explain it. If they say yes, then we move on. Those kinds of things. It's just really about, for me, with the American students in particular, it's more about just kind of taking a softer approach to it and just being in tune with the timing of when the feedback is appropriate. Because like if you take us, for example, I'm not a podcaster. I'm not an expert podcaster at all. I don't know anything about podcasting, but let's just say that I was. Let's say that I was a podcaster and you were my student. It would not be appropriate right now for me to give you feedback on the way you host your show, right? If I said, "Oh, that wasn't really a good question. You should formulate it like this." That would not go over well. So it's about knowing the individual, the circumstances, the context, the culture, how do they respond to feedback, and just having kind of a good sense of timing as to when the feedback is most appropriate so that it's effective.
Um, that's great. There's too many information that can you tell me, I've watched a couple of your TED Talk, right? You're talking about Gen Z, in particular. Can you tell me, like, what's the difference when you teach, like, I'm a millennial, how the teaching approach changes from millennials to Gen Z and probably the future generation? What's the difference and how would you know that?
I have to ask, I'm a millennial too. I was born in 1987. When were you born?
1988.
Oh, stop it. We're like basically the same age. That's amazing. I love that.
Yes.
So there is a world of difference. And I talk about these in my two books. One is called Empowering Gen Z, Practical Lessons to Take Students from Z to A++. It's available on Amazon. And I'm gonna tell you that as a teacher, when I first got started 12 years ago, I had a hard time with the Gen Z students. I really did. I did not understand who they were and what their personalities were like and what they valued and those things. I did not know. Now, I was able, because I was fairly young at the time, like 20, I got started in teaching kind of late. So I was like maybe 26 or so at the time. And I got I would say I got by with my students because I was young and I could kind of relate to what they were talking about. We had some commonalities, so it wasn't too terribly hard. And because I was a good teacher, they respected me, but there were definitely like gaps, huge, huge generational gaps. And it got bigger and it got wider. The gap got wider every year. And I remember thinking to myself, I think it was probably in year 6, there was an activity we did in class, and one of the questions pertained to like an old Disney movie. And none of my kids had heard of the movie. Like, imagine talking to someone who's never heard of The Lion King or, something like that, right? And I was like, it was wild. So that was the first time that I really felt old. And I was like, I cannot relate to these kids at all. And then again, but I still was a good teacher. I still had a good reputation. So that kind of carried me through, even though I didn't fully understand these kids. Then I would say in 2020, so about 5 years ago, I had a breakthrough. And the breakthrough came from talking to my mom. I was talking to her. She's a full-blown like mega genius. I don't know how she does it. She's just born that way. And she was teaching me about the generational differences in how to communicate, particularly with millennials and with Gen Z. And she was showing me the differences, like in the words and, how they affect people differently. And I was like, the light bulb went off. And from then on, I started honing in on everything Gen Z, their qualities, their characteristics, their communication styles, their tendencies, patterns of behavior, their belief systems, their philosophies, their sense of logic, that's so different. It's radically different from millennials. It's so different. I mean, I don't even know how to say it. It's that the gap is that wide. At least in my experience anyway. Now it may be different for some people, but that was just for me. And so for them, one of the things that I obviously had to learn was the brevity. That was one of the things. I had to be very brief. As a millennial, we can be verbose, we can be very talkative, just like I am right now. I'm talking a lot. And Gen Zers, they're not so much about that. They're not so much about the lecture style of things in the sense that you're just wah 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 wah. It's not that's really not their cup of tea. They like a lot of interactivity, a lot of engagement, they like competition, that kind of thing. They like good energy, positive energy. And so I've learned to be much more positive in my communication. One thing about me that I did not realize was that a lot of the words that I was using had negative undertones. I thought that I was just being honest and direct, but I realized that some of the words to Gen Zers felt heavy and negative. And once I realized that, because my mom taught me, once I realized that, I really was able to shift gears in the way that I communicate with Gen Zers. And I'll give you an example. So, one example, as a millennial, if let's say you came to me and you said that your podcast had 10 million views, I would be like, oh my gosh, Ian, let's go. Like, that's so exciting. And, that's very me, very millennial. And we would celebrate and I would just sing your praises. Not so with Gen Z. It's the total opposite. I keep my emotions very in check. With Gen Z, I've made that mistake where I've like overwhelmed them with my emotions and my feelings and things like that. And as a teacher now, if somebody tells me, if a Gen Zer tells me that they did something good, like they got an A on a test or something, I'm like, cool, awesome. That's really good. Yeah. How do you feel about that? I might ask them one question and that's it. And they're like, I feel good. And I'm like, great. And then that's it. That's literally it. So, the emotional, one of the key things with Gen Z is their emotional range is not as far, it's not as wide as millennials. Millennials experience a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions. And if you were to look at it on a scale, like if you were to say, okay, here's an extreme negative emotion, here's an extreme positive emotion, millennials can go way out wide. But and that's not a bad thing at all. They can be, anywhere on the spectrum. But Gen Zers, not so much. So if the positive emotion is here and the negative emotion is here, and here's the length of the scale, Gen Zers occupy about this much space emotionally. They do not go out, they don't expand and all that. They kind of stay here. And so you as the teacher, not you specifically, but just in my experience, if you go outside or try to get them to widen their emotions, it does not work out. So they like to kind of stick in this range where it's not overly positive, it's not overly negative, it's just kind of in the middle. So knowing that is something that has helped me to adapt to teaching Gen Z.
Lovely. So let's talk more about the technicality of academic writing. One of the challenges that I have, I focus more on ESL, IELTS, and TOEFL, is that they're not really familiar with the structure. For example, they're not able to deliver a good thesis statement. They'll just write, in this essay, I'll just talk about the advantage or disadvantages. From your experience, what are the common mistakes that people does or do when it comes to academic writing?
Yeah, you made a good point. The thesis is one of the hardest things for kids to write because they don't okay, so I think that thesis statements are one of the hardest things for kids to write. One, because they don't have a lot of life experience because they're kids. So as a kid, when I was a kid, I even had a hard time writing thesis statements because I didn't have a ton of life experience. Really, the only experiences that I had were playing basketball and going to school. Like that was it. So I kind of feel for students in this regard. I have a lot of empathy for them. When a teacher asks them to write a thesis statement and they have no experience in the actual subject area that they're writing, it can be very daunting to write a thesis statement because now you have to express an opinion about something that you know very little about. And that to me doesn't make much sense. So if you were to, for example, have a kid write an essay on Romeo and Juliet, a ninth grade reading assignment, and they had to write a thesis statement on that, that to me might be difficult for them to do because maybe they don't have any experience with relationships. I mean, it's so in or maybe they do have experiences with relationships, but they're kind of shallow. So writing a thesis statement can be very difficult because they don't have that life experience. Now, as an adult, I can write a thesis statement really well because I'm 37. I've got a lot of life experience under my belt. I've had relationships. I've done all these things. I've traveled. And so if somebody were to ask me to write a thesis about a particular topic, as long as I had the experience and I knew something about it, yeah, I can write a good thesis statement. I've got literature, I've got the information, I can read it through. I can do that. It's not a problem. But as a kid, that's a hard, to me, in my opinion, it's a kind of a hard ask, especially with someone with so little experience in life. The other thing, it's not impossible though. The other thing that I think can help um, them write better thesis statements is to get off this. I know that's a hard ask, but the technology is causing people not to be able to formulate their own thoughts. because they're consuming all the time. You're consuming somebody else's thoughts all day, every day. So you never get the chance to express your own. You never get the chance to have a thought. You just get your dopamine hit, dopamine hit, dopamine hit, dopamine hit, dopamine hit, dopamine. I mean, that's never really going to be helpful when it comes to academic writing. So that's one thing I think that also prevents, Gen Zers, or not just Gen Zers, but really anybody from writing a strong thesis statement in academic writing, is because of that. That's a part of it. Another piece to the equation is because, or another piece to the equation is that they're not reading. So if we're on the subject of Gen Zers don't read a lot. Now, there are some Gen Zers that do, obviously, but as a whole, they don't read a lot, and they don't read very well either. So because of that, if they don't read well and they don't read much at all, and really what they're reading is just kind of clickbait type stuff. They're reading like hashtags, clickbait, maybe a caption on an Instagram photo and stuff like that. All of that is fine, but it's not that deep level processing that you need to be able to grow as a human being internally, and to learn things and to process new information and all of that. They don't have those experiences. So if you're young and you have very little experience, you don't read well, and you're doing this all day, like you're just it's common sense. You're not going to be able to put together a strong thesis statement, and of course it is going to be a struggle. And I think that, getting kids out of their normal routines so that they can experience life a little bit, and have them, listen to wise people, have them listen to podcasts. If they don't want to read, have them listen to an audiobook, have them listen to a podcast, have them do something that stimulates their mind, and have discussions on that. Okay, intense discussions, and let them learn and listen. One thing about Gen Zers that's very different than millennials is that millennials like to talk. Gen Zers like to listen. They do. They very much so like to listen because they learn something. It's stimulating for them. And so as a millennial teacher, I've had to adapt my teaching style to help stimulate thought so that they can produce, so that they can write, because they're kind of coming in empty. They're coming in on E, and they're not bringing a lot to the table. So in order to get them to write a strong thesis statement, there has to be a buildup, almost like a tsunami. It has to be kind of like a tsunami of buildup, lots of reading, lots of engagement, lots of discussion, lots of listening, lots and lots and lots of stimulation. And then when they get that, and you ask them to write, the words more or less flow. It still needs a lot of work, a lot of tweaking and practice and stuff, of course, but at least you're working with something rather than nothing.
There are so many questions that I would love to ask more. But we're
We can do another
on.
podcast.
Yes. So let's talk more about you personally. Of course we name this podcast as Tea Podcast. Usually we share tea. So what about you? What is your favorite tea and why?
My favorite tea
Yes.
is just anything herbal. I love orange, tangerine, pomegranate type flavors and things, but green tea is great as well. So any kind of herbal tea that just makes you feel really warm and fuzzy on the inside, I'm all for it.
And can you tell me more about the Turning the Tide Tutoring LLC? You mentioned about the waves. Is that the reason behind you name your company as Turning the Tide, or can you tell me more about it? Like,
Yeah,
how
no,
did you
thank you so
name
much.
it?
Thank you. Thank you. So, actually, I've had this name in the works for a long time. I just never really did anything with it. And where it came from was I was working with so many students who struggled, and it's not always like that. Sometimes I just get kids. I had a kid several months ago who he wasn't really struggling with much of anything school-wise, academically. He was great. but he just wanted enrichment. He just wanted to, be around smart people and talk to them and learn from them. And that was rare, very, very, very rare, but it was a great experience. And but anyway, the majority of the students that I worked with, they struggle a lot in their subject areas. And because we were able to, as you say, kind of turn the ship around for a much more positive result, I named the business Turning the Tide because in my life, I've always been kind of a beach girl, beach curls, beach hair, all that kind of stuff. So I've always been a beach person and I love water and all of that and the waves. And it's just very tranquil. And, it's just kind of, it touches my soul. But when I helped students, I was like, what's a watery, beachy type phrase that I can use that's positive and that conveys what I'm trying to help people, particularly kids, do. And that is turn the tide on their education, turn the tide on everything that they're doing, their goals, their performance, their results, their grades. Let's turn the tide on all of this and get the result that you want and deserve and are willing to work for. So that's how I came up with the name.
That's nice. And do you offer any particular program, particularly in academic writing? Can you share more about it?
Yeah, there's quite a few. So if you go to turningthetide tutoring.com, you'll see a button that says book now, and there's tons of courses there. I don't teach all of them because I can't do like biology and physics and calculus and all that kind of stuff. That stuff just does not come naturally to me. But there's plenty of writing courses on there. There's a creative writing course that I teach. There's an authorship course, like if you want to become a published author, write books and things like that, you can also take that. And I also do have some amazing courses that are going to be posted on the website soon. And I've got the course already developed. So if anybody wants to take it, just send me an email at turningthetide tutoringllc@gmail.com and I'll get that course to you. But it is a children's book course. So for anybody who wants to write a children's book, it walks you right through the whole process of how to do that. And it's very simple, easy to follow, and you get day by day, step by step instructions on, how to do that. So I love writing and I love teaching people how to write and I love editing. I also have my own like ghost writing editing agency as well outside of Turning the Tide tutoring called Generational Copy. And we help people edit their books, publish their books, write great query letters. We also help them put together some amazing proposals if they want to seek out an agent, to potentially get a traditional publishing deal, all kinds of things. So I'm very immersed in the writing world and I love helping people, achieve their academic goals, but also their creative ones as well.
Thank you so much. And for my last question for today is, what's the one piece of advice that you would like to leave to our listeners, future students, probably?
Don't be afraid to book a session. Don't be afraid to book a session. It doesn't matter what subject you are teaching. I know or you're trying to learn. I would say that probably 99% of the subjects, no, I can't say that. That's not true. But a lot. I have a lot. A lot of subjects I have listed on the website are taught by industry professionals, educator, like professional educators that are so talented. And they teach a lot of the courses and do live tutoring sessions and things like that. So don't be afraid to book a session with any of us. We are there to help you. I'm there to help you every step of the way for sure, to make sure that everything goes well because we're a very small company. But, like I said, just don't be afraid to reach out to me or to anyone on the team because we're there to help you. And in addition to that, if the course or the subject area that you're looking for is not listed on the website, chances are I know somebody who teaches that concept. And that could range from anything to parent coaching. Maybe you're a parent and you're looking for assistance and you don't know how to navigate some complex family challenges that everyone has. Everybody goes through them. That's for sure. And, maybe you need some assistance with that. I know somebody who can help you. If you are looking for meditation, breathing, I know somebody who can help you. If you're looking for gardening and, plants, botany, that kind of thing, I know someone who can help you. If you're looking just generally to be happy, just to have a good, thriving spiritual life, I know someone who can help you. So I know a lot of really great and talented people. I wish I was as talented as they are. I'm not. I kind of just stay in my lane a little bit. But I let the people who really excel at those things do what they do. So don't be afraid to book a session or to reach out.
Thank you so much, Miss Nikki Hernandez. So thank you so much. And I cannot really express my appreciation to you. So this is our end of the podcast. To be honest, I don't know how to close it, but thank you again. And I hope
Thank
that we
you.
could work someday. Okay?
Yeah, thank you, Ian. I so appreciate you as well, and thank you to your audience and everyone who's watching.
Lovely. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mhm.